pain can be a driver to change. Sometimes you do things that everyone else thinks are insane, and even you think they're insane.
Leon Logotide. He's traveled every continent and over 100 countries spreading kindness. You literally get from one place to another based on human kindness.
Can I spend the night in your house tonight?
Can I live in your house tonight?
Unfortunately, I don't have a house. I'm homeless right now.
Where are you headed?
I'm driving from Alaska to Argentina. I have no food, no gas, no place to stay. I rely entirely on the kindness of strangers. That's what kindness really is. It's about connecting with each other. We are not robots sitting behind TV screens or sending Instagram messages. We are human beings that need each other.
How would you contrast America with the rest of the world in terms of our humanity?
Look,
you have a successful TV show, couple books, you travel the world. You know, I've seen your TED Talk. I've seen a little bit about you online, and you meet all these people and you're extracting and exploring human kindness and connection. And it sounds like an awfully fulfilling existence. I honestly a little bit envious. Human connection is a pretty magical thing. But tell me about Leon before he was doing all that stuff. How'd you get in a position to make this your life?
so I used to be a broker in the city of London. And on the outside, I had pretty much everything you could want.
Is that real estate broker?
Actually, I was a shipping broker. I was working with ships, but no one really understands what a shipping broker is. So I just say I was a broker. And they're like, oh, all right, then. Pretty simple. And I had pretty much everything you'd want on the outside, but not much that you would want on the inside. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I was very, very depressed. Racked with anxiety, really not in a very good way. No real sense of purpose. And things were kind of going downhill, let's put it that way. But no one knew. I knew, but no one else knew. And then I stumbled across the movie The Motorcycle Diaries, which is a romanticized version of Che Guevara traveling around South America, relying on kindness. And there was something about that movie that truly touched my soul in a very profound way. And to cut a very long story short, after watching that movie, because really the movie was a tipping point, right? But after watching that movie, I quit my job and I started to travel around the world, relying on kindness. One of the first journeys I did was I hitchhiked from Times Square to the Hollywood sign. Then I hitchhiked from the Eiffel Tower to Red Square in Moscow. Then I did a trip all the way around England, again, relying on kindness. And it just opened my heart in such profound ways that made me realize that there was another way to live. I didn't have to live behind that slab of wood. And look, there's nothing wrong with working behind a desk. If that's your passion, if that's your purpose, then great, go for it. But for me, it wasn't. And that movie just kind of was as I mentioned earlier, was that tipping point to shift my life to doing something very different.
When I remember the movie, it has I think he's a Spanish actor. I can't remember his name.
Garcia Bernal, I believe his name was.
Yeah. A great actor, great movie. I want to say that's 25 years ago, something like that.
I believe it came out in 2004.
Okay. Is that about when you saw it?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't mind me asking, how old were you at that time?
Well, I'm 46 now, so I must have been 27.
Yeah, thereabouts. Okay, so that's interesting. So you're 46, I'm 44, you were 27, I was 29 when whatever the thing happened that took our life in a totally different direction. And there's probably a theme there. I mean, it's a small sample group, but there's probably a theme there about men having existential angst in their late 20s.
I think there is. I read somewhere that at 28, something happens to us.
Huh. Well, it sure did for me. That's when I actually went online. I sort of reinvented myself to be more of a at least professionally doing business online, which was completely different than doing business in the real world. But anyway, this is a conversation about you, not me. The reason that's so interesting to me though is, being in entrepreneurial education now, every day I have, a couple hundred people, give or take, join my platform saying, I'm here to change my life. I want a new direction for my life. I want to chart a different course. A lot of people say it. Not everybody really means it or is willing to make the sacrifices that would go along with it, or willing to endure the alienation or the shame or the embarrassment or even just the questions from people of like, what are you doing? And then that internal risk thermostat of like, sustaining the discomfort of making a non-traditional choice for their life. There's all these factors, right? So obviously you at 27, you were ready. You were able to cross that bridge. To what do you attribute the fact that you didn't, like so many people, just have this novel idea, but you actually took action on it and in fact rearranged your entire life around it?
Emotional pain. Sometimes pain can be a driver to change. And like I mentioned, the movie was a tipping point. I had been going down, let's say, the wrong road for me for quite a few years, and I hadn't been able to change. But I had kept on going. I'd kept on going to therapy. I'd kept on trying to work on myself. I'd kept on reading books. I kept on kind of watching inspiring documentaries until that one documentary came along and pushed me over the edge. That's basically how it happened.
Pain as the primer for change. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I can't help. I'm kind of a word nerd, and I can't help but point out what's like screaming in my ears right now. One of my favorite books is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. In fact, I just committed, I literally just loaded it up on my audiobooks list to reread it or re-listen to it for, I don't know, the umpteenth time. It's kind of one of those, like, it's like taking a vitamin every few months, right? Or, I mean, probably every couple of years I listen to it. But Viktor Frankl obviously invented logotherapy, logothetis, right? I mean, even mnemonically, it's very similar. But like, you talked about having no meaning in your life, and your name is almost like, I haven't done the origin, but I mean, logos is like the ultimate, the Greek word for like the ultimate meaning that underlies everything. It's right there built into even your name. It's been with you your whole life, this implied meaning. So now that you have the benefit of hindsight and reflection, why do you think you were so unhappy?
First of all, I will say that book, Man's Search for Meaning, is profoundly beautiful. Also horrifying, of course. But the end result is something beautiful. And he has a famous part in the book where he basically says the last part of a human's control. I'm going to butcher it, but he basically says the last choice that a human has is how he feels inside, and no one can take that away from you. Mm-hmm. And if he could do that whilst in Auschwitz, then we can do that free where we are, right? Look, it was just I was being bullied at school. I was living in an environment where I felt that something wasn't right, and it just kind of built up. I was a very sensitive kid. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard, and it just kind of snowballed into, by my late 20s, everything on the outside was fine, but everything on the inside was crumbling. And I think many people can relate to that everything on the outside's okay, but inside we're crumbling and no one knows. And only when the crumbling gets too much do people start to realize what's actually going on. And I don't think there's a human being alive that hasn't had that kind of moment at some point in their lives. And the difference is between those who find the courage or the ability to change, and those, unfortunately, who don't.
So you were 27 and you I assume you quit your job. I mean, you had to put in your notice. You had to burn some number of boats, so to speak, right? And because you're going to go on this journey reliant on, as you call it now, human kindness. Although at the time, I suspect you didn't know if you'd find kindness that was reliable. You just, I don't know. What were you thinking? Like, what was going through your head at the time? And also, how did you verbalize it to people?
Look, sometimes you do things that everyone else thinks are insane, and even you think they're insane, but there's a burning fire inside that makes you do it anyway. And that's kind of what happened. And look, people were like, you've lost your mind. And I was like, yeah, probably, but I'm going to do it anyway. And people were like, you're not going to be able to make it across America. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right, but I'm going to do it anyway. And let's see what happens. And I remember getting to Times Square, and it took me 5 or 6 hours to get out of Times Square because no one would help me. And I started to think to myself, well, you know what? Maybe they were all right. And this was the stupidest thing I've ever done. But I found one person to help me. They got me to New Jersey, and it all started from there. So there are times when you just have to jump. And when you jump, I think it's Martin Luther King that said it. I can't remember. He basically said, when you jump, the net will appear. I think it was him. And that's sometimes what you got to do. You got to go for it. Did I know that it was going to work itself out? No. Did I have doubts in the back of my head that it was going to be a disaster? Absolutely. Did I keep going? Yes. Was it a disaster? Thankfully not.
So I just Googled it. The quote is, leap and the net will appear. And it says it's a quote by John Burroughs. The reason I Googled it is because it's so perfectly captures my experience with people, which is, and the metaphor I always use is, they want to know that all the lights are already green before they'll leave for wherever they want to go. And that, I mean, obviously, if we lived our life that way, we'd never leave the house. But when it comes to these big journeys, especially those with uncertain destinations, then, this sense of assurance. And I actually, it's funny, we're talking about this right now. I have a reel, today's reel that got shared on Instagram was about how the appropriate ability to quantify and tolerate risk is actually the new adaptive survival mechanism in the modern world, right? For most of human history, it was a pretty general truism to say, reduce risk in your life. Because risk was like being, murdered by an enemy tribe, or, contracting tuberculosis, or like whatever risk was. I mean, generally it was like, just play it safe. But in the modern world, hell, I mean, they can't even put you in prison for not paying your debts. Like a couple hundred years ago, if you didn't pay your debts, they'd put you in a Siberian labor camp. Now you're just like, oh, well, file Chapter 11 and, hit the reset button, and 7 years from now you can buy a house again. Like, we don't even have real price tags anymore. And yet everybody's acting like we're still running on this operating system, this, limbic brain that acts like there's a saber-toothed tiger around every corner. And even to what you've illustrated, that we think that other human beings are the saber-toothed tiger. And you've effectively gone out and proven. And how many countries have you done this type of experiment in to say, hey, is there enough kindness here that you can actually live off of it?
So look, I don't know the exact number. I mean, I've been to 101 countries, but this type of adventure, I've done it in, I'd say, about 50, right?
Okay.
And when you say that I've proven that, people aren't like saber-toothed tigers, or I've proven that people are kind and there's nothing to be afraid of with people, there are people that we should be afraid of. That's the truth. There are also people that we should not be afraid of. But bad things happen. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, always when I give my speeches, I talk about this not being a Pollyannish speech. I'm not going out there and saying, oh, just live with your heart wide open and everything will work itself out. No, you have to be clever as well as living with your heart open, because there are people out there that will squash you. That's a fact.
So I think it's probably fair to say you've explored the human condition to a depth that most people haven't. In terms of going more places, meeting more types of people, being more exposed and vulnerable, having more types of unique interactions with people. And so I'm curious, in general, and I'm not asking you to be reductive and just make one statement or be absolute. It's more just like, what's your general take on people? And I'm also curious, what's your general take on culture? Are there certain types of cultures or countries or socioeconomic environments or whatnot that change your assessment of people generally?
So look, that's a great question. And I'll answer the people question first. At the base of our humanity, we are all the same, irrespective of color, irrespective of religion, irrespective of how much money you have, how much money you don't have. At the base of our humanity, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be loved. And that was a powerful thing to realize, not just to realize it intellectually, but to realize it in the very center of my being. When it comes to the question about culture, of course, some cultures are different, obviously, right? There are differences. And the same thing with, there are differences in each individual, but at the base of our humanity, we are the same. But cultures are different. Some cultures are more open than others. I went to a country in Eastern Europe. I'm not going to mention the name, but I went to this country and I was walking around the streets and not many people were smiling. And I didn't feel all that, welcomed, let's put it that way. Then I went to a country in Asia and I felt there was so much love and so much warmth and it was beautiful. Does that mean the people in the country in Asia are better than the people in the country in Eastern Europe? No, it just means that they have different cultures. And maybe the people in Eastern Europe, in this specific country I went to, had this facade of don't come near me, right? But if you were their friends, if you were their family, they were filled with love. In fact, I actually spoke to a friend of mine who lived there and he told me exactly that. He's like, look, on the outside, they look harsh, but once you get to know them, there's so much love. But there's differences in culture, right? And that's primarily, I think, because of history. Yeah. In Eastern Europe, there was many years of communism. In Eastern Europe, they don't like cameras. Where I was in Asia, there was just a different feel about it.
Yeah, somebody, I'm trying to remember I want to say it was, I have a friend named Monique who's from the Netherlands, and I think it was her. And she said, Dutch people have hard exteriors, but soft interiors. And she said, my experience of Americans is that you have soft exteriors, but actually frustratingly hard interiors relative. And she was a very well-traveled person. And I thought that was interesting. I took that personally in a good way to say, okay, I'm gonna really assess my environment and say, like, what are and I think there's some merit to that. Anyway, it's probably a separate conversation about America, but actually, you know what? Let's not make it a separate conversation about America. You're here. You've done this here. Sounds like multiple times, perhaps. How would you contrast America with the rest of the world in terms of our humanity?
Look, if you watch the news, you would think that America was filled with horrible human beings because of the news, right? Because we are given information that is just that 0.0001% of the bad things that go on. But I've traveled through America countless times. I've crossed this country literally 10 times. 10 times. For me, to go from LA to New York is like going to the grocery store. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to drive to New York, right? So, and I have experienced so much love, so much beauty, so much magnificence from the people that I've met. Maybe it's because of my English accent, I don't know, but there is a generosity of spirit that I have experienced in this country that I would go so far as to say, on some level, is second to none. It is magnificent. And it's why it upsets me so much when I turn on the news, although lately I don't turn on the news. But when I did turn on the news, it upsets me because people get the impression that the country is falling apart, that the people are out to kill each other, that it's awful. I don't experience that. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there that do that. There are, very clearly. But the vast majority of the people that I have met in this country come from a place of love, come from a place of generosity. And it's a beautiful experience to meet them.
So when you first ventured out and started doing this, how long were you out before you sort of regrouped and returned to home base and maybe paused and self-assessed?
So one of my first journeys, as I mentioned, was America. I did about a month. It took me about a month to cross. Then I did England, which again took about a month. So it was in and out. I did some other trips. I did some other journeys. Sometimes, when I moved to Los Angeles, I opened up a television production company. So I stayed still for a little bit, but I was always doing journeys in between until 2013, really, when I quit my job again. I clearly like quitting jobs as a TV executive, and I started doing the Kindness Diaries, which was where I purchased the vintage yellow motorbike with a sidecar, yellow, called it Kindness One, sort of like Air Force One, and drove it from LA all the way around the earth back to LA. And from that moment on, my life became that. Doesn't mean I'm always on the road living on kindness. No, I have a house, I have a bank account. Sometimes people say to me, "Do you have money?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And they're like, "Oh, we thought you just lived off kindness for the rest of your life." I'm like, "Well, no, that was a show and, some books, but I have a life beyond that." Right. So yeah, that's kind of it. It's just been an interesting adventure for sure.
Do you have a family?
I have a dog.
A dog. Okay.
And a partner.
Okay.
And she puts up with me, surprisingly.
It reminds me of, do you travel with your dog?
I do. It's interesting. My dog is such an interesting fellow. He has, this is just crazy, but he has PTSD and he doesn't like the car. So I would do these long journeys with him and he would freak out. So every time he gets into the car, I give him a treat. So he loves getting into the car. So he doesn't have PTSD anymore, but I can't take him on super long journeys, but I take him everywhere that's not super long.
Yeah, I was referencing John Steinbeck, Travels with Charlie, when I asked. It's a Steinbeck novel about him. Kind of similar thing, driving around, exploring America with his dog.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, okay. Thank you for filling in some of the kind of the bio details. So you, I guess, talk to me about, because I'm really interested, for context, in the revelation of the purpose of a life, right? I guess referencing Viktor Frankl again, there's a quote in there that says, something to the effect of, for more and more people now, survival is kind of an assured thing. Like, we all have the means to live, which then begs the question, the meaning for which to live, right? And I'm really interested in that. And my life in particular changed dramatically about 5 years ago when I figured out my sort of big disruptive purpose. Like, why am I here on this earth? And I mean, literally to the level of I don't need as much sleep anymore. I don't get sick anymore so much. I don't want to knock on wood. I'm sure I'll contract a cold at some point, but I don't, and mostly I don't worry about things anymore. Cause it's I'm doing what I'm created to do. So whoever came up with that idea probably didn't have a plan. Whatever happens, it's just part of the plan. Right. So there's a real peace that came with that. And I want that. Truly, if I could bottle up my mission and say, what is it? It's I want that for everyone, to find that moment of clarity where suddenly their purpose emerges and the rest of their life is it's like the red pill, right? It's eyes wide open, there's no going back. And it's a completely different life that's possible when you're clear on your purpose. So when did this become that for you? And is that, you said now this is your life, this is it, right? So when did that moment happen? You're okay, I have found my path.
So look, as I mentioned earlier, as a kid, I felt very disconnected. And I was being bullied very viciously for many years. And I had this one teacher who would always look at me in the eyes and tell me, I believe in you. And I share this story because she was a witness. She witnessed me. And I'd never felt witnessed. I never felt seen. I read a book by Alice Miller called The Drama of a Gifted Child. And in that book, she says that as human beings, all of us, we need to be witnessed. We need to be seen. As I said, we're all the same, right? We want to be loved, we want to be seen, we want to be heard. So she witnessed me. And I never forgot that. I never forgot that in my cells. I knew how it felt to be loved, as opposed to the opposite of that. And I took that and integrated it into my life and wanted to have that feeling for myself and to give it to others. And that's really kind of where it started. I wasn't conscious of any of that, right, when I was 13, 14, 15. But looking back at it, that's where it all began. And I remember reaching out to her and thanking her. In fact, my first ever book I dedicated to her because she made me the human being that I am today. And that in some way is what I wanted to do to others in my own small little way, was to create TV shows that saw them, that created books that saw them, that, created documentaries that made them feel like someone knows who they are. And it all came from that one moment. Well, not one moment. There were multiple moments of her making me feel like I had value.
So I love this because it's so beautifully simple. And by the way, I completely agree with you, both from like intellectual training and also from life experience, that like that longing to be known. Adlerian psychology tells us that the three motivations of all human behavior are to belong, to stand out, like to be different. So it's interesting. We want to belong to a group, but we don't want to be homogenous with the group. We want to have distinction. But then the third is to have meaning and purpose to our life, right? We want to be recognized as distinct and significant in the sense that our life matters. And I agree. I look at most of, let's call it human floundering, right? It's sort of this flopping around through life and bumping up against our addictions or our escapes or our vices or our neuroses or whatever. And I'll just say my experience is consistent with what you're saying, that's actually the common thread in most people's dysfunction. Is it's their attempts to be seen or recognized, or their tests to make sure that the world values them or sees them or knows them or cares about them. So how do you sort of operationalize that, like day to day now in your life? Like what's a day look like for you, and what's your metric for success now at this point?
Well, it depends on the definition of success, right? So there's success from the perspective of, I don't know, selling books, getting TV shows on great channels, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's success in how you are as a human being. So I'm going to talk about not the metrics of success for selling books, because we all know what those are.
Right.
I'll talk about the metrics of success of who you are as a human being. And I guess the metrics of success is, when you wake up, do you feel alive? When you wake up, do you feel like you have purpose? When you wake up, do you feel like you are adding value to the people in your life? Are you making them feel like they are important? Are you instilling joy and hope and compassion into their lives? And if you're not, it's probably not a great success. But at the same time, don't think that because I'm using these lofty words that I do that all the time, that I'm always able to do that. I absolutely am not. This morning, I did not wake up with any of those things in my heart. I was having a moment right? I was having a moment. And to be totally honest with you, I was kind of hoping you were going to cancel this podcast because I wasn't in the right frame of mind to have this conversation with you. I was not walking the walk. But sometimes you have to stop by the side of the road, drink some water, have some energy bars, and then keep on going. However long you have to stop for, as long as you don't stop forever, right? So there is no perfection. That's one of the reasons why I was kind of like how do I say this? I was a reluctant, I don't even want to call myself a teacher, but I was a reluctant teacher. I was a reluctant author. I was a reluctant, I was like, I didn't want to, I grew up watching all these preachers talking about all these like amazing things to do. And then the next day you'd see them in the newspaper and you'd be like, oh, they're just pardon my language. They're just liars.
They're good.
Right? They're just lies. They're not, but it's not necessarily about, it's about authenticity. It's about truth. And the fact that I came onto your podcast and I just told you the truth, I was hoping you'd cancel, not because I have anything against you. I don't. Clearly, you're a magnificent human being. But internally, I was having my own little mini meltdown, right? But thankfully, you didn't cancel. And here we are having a beautiful conversation. And the guy that woke up in the morning is actually not the same guy that's on this conversation with you. So I have to thank you for not canceling. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate that. But I mean, isn't that illustrative of kind of the point, which is that human connection often can draw our best qualities to the surface and get us out of those funks.
It definitely does. It definitely does. I'll tell you a little story. I was giving a speech in Canada, about to give a speech in Canada, and I wasn't feeling in the greatest of mood. And I prayed, not literally, I prayed to wake up in the morning and for there to be snow so that the speech could be cancelled. And this is an example again of connection. Like I was disconnected in that moment and I didn't want to connect, even though connection would be the thing that would make me better, right? It didn't snow and I did the speech and I felt better.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, there's a quote and it's too far away. I'm not going to be able to grasp it. I apologize, but it's, there it is. Awesome. See, I said I wasn't going to come and that created the space for it to come. It says that depression, I think Freud said this, depression is rage turned inward. And I feel like what you just described, that turning into oneself that we do when we feel disconnected, it's essentially we double down on the negative, right? And we withdraw from the medication that is freely given to all of us in the form of other people. I mean, unless you're alone on a desert island, the prescription to feel better is all around you.
Yeah.
But how often do we withdraw? We isolate. What have you learned about that from your experiences that perhaps those that have not pushed themselves to the same degree in terms of testing and understanding connection might not, just sort of naturally understand? Like, why do we do that to ourselves?
Yeah, it's a good point. So when I was working as a TV exec in Hollywood, I was having a moment again, and I found myself walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and I saw this homeless guy with a sign that said, "Kindness is the best medicine." And based on what you just said about connection, it could have said, "Human connection is the best medicine," right? Because that's what kindness really is. It's about connecting with each other. It's about reminding ourselves that we are not robots sitting behind TV screens or sending tweets or sending Instagram messages. We are human beings that need each other. And this is a perfect example of someone, me, who needed connection today, yet was willing to go down the road of disconnection in order to fix himself, which makes absolutely no sense because it doesn't fix yourself at all. It makes it worse.
Yeah,
I will say one more thing. I will say that what just happened today? So my book, Go Be Brave, is about obviously being brave. And people say, well, Leo, what's your definition of being brave? Well, my definition of being brave is speaking truth, your truth, right? Sharing your pain, standing in your power, basically being vulnerable. And what happened here right now was again, I didn't consciously think about this, right? But I had an opportunity to speak my truth with you, or to lie, or to hide. And for some reason, I spoke my truth. And I told you the truth, the 100% truth that no one would have known had I not told you right here. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And that's the essence of bravery. It's that vulnerable piece of reminding ourselves of our humanity. Now, would I have shared that with you if I didn't feel a connection with you? No, I wouldn't. So when I talk about going to be brave and speaking your truth, I am not saying to do that with people who are unsafe. Like, I could have said that to you and you could have been offended. You'd been like, Leo, you wanted to cancel on me? What the hell's wrong with you? And maybe, I don't know, maybe inside you're thinking that. I have no idea. But it doesn't seem that way, because there's just two men having a truthful, vulnerable conversation with each other. You know what it's like to be weak, to be vulnerable, to be in a place where you don't want to be in. So do I. So does every single person, man or woman, who is listening to this conversation. They know. So go be brave and speak the truth. Find a safe person like you or like me and speak truth to them.
Well, I think you're touching on a really, really profound irony that I think is especially true in the modern world and probably exacerbated to the point of cliche by social media, which is we so deeply desire to be known, right? To be authentically felt and accepted. But yet we think in order to be accepted, we have to present a, to some degree, falsified or at least curated version of ourselves. But as soon as you present anything to the world that is any less than, or to I say to the world, to another person, anything that is less than or altered from the true authentic essence of you, your truth, as you would put it, you actually make it impossible to be known by the other person. And yet that is what we so deeply crave. And that is why we're falsifying ourselves in the first place, is because we want to be accepted, but you can't be accepted if you're not being authentic. It's like, so we're like caught in this bizarre, illogical loop that defines most of probably modern interaction, and we have our reasons why. But no, I was not offended by you saying that. This is literally all these conversations on this show are probably the most, I'd say, other than maybe some talks with my wife. I mean, this is like as honest as my life gets. And that's why I love it. That's why I keep coming back. By the way, this is also the least profitable thing I do with my time in my professional life. Like, you don't get paid jack shit for hosting a podcast. Anybody's out there that's like, I'm going to get rich with podcasting. Your name ain't Joe Rogan and neither is mine. But the conversations are fuel for an authentic life when you find other people that are willing to enter into them. So I appreciate you telling me the truth. I want to go back to your definition of success, and then I want to give you more space to talk about your book. Obviously, you have a book. It just came out, Go Be Brave. Awesome. I love that you connected bravery to authenticity and vulnerability, which the root of vulnerability, vulnus, the Latin word for wound. It's the ability to be wounded, which you certainly can be when you're open and honest. But let's go back to your definition of success, because I hope for the audience, I'm always, as I have these conversations, right? I mean, it's you and me, but it's all of us listening, right? And I'm always looking for what's the thing that we can all be united in our humanity around? What's the kind of the gold nugget from the show? And I feel like your definition of success of am I waking up with a sense of energy and purpose and a sense that I'm able to add value and be nurturing and take care of the people I love. And I don't, we can go back and rewind the tape and listen to your words about it. But that felt like a pretty, you said that we're all the same underneath, by some token, then our definition of success, our true definition of success, is probably also the same underneath. And the way you described it sounded probably pretty close to it.
Yeah. I mean, look, we live in a society that tells us that success is make as much money as you can, be as famous as you can. And there's nothing wrong with making money. Make as much as you want. There's nothing wrong with being famous. Become as famous as you want. But if beneath that, you're broken, I mean, I don't know. That to me doesn't seem very successful.
Well, and I think that, you know, this is a really interesting filter to apply to one's life or one's set of possibilities, right? Is, let's say at any given time, there's 100 things we could go do to make money. How many of them allow you to be truly and completely yourself? How many, and on the flip side, how many of them would allow you to sacrifice the eternal or metaphysical or spiritual definition of success, where there would have to be a zero-sum trade? Like, hey, in order to have some material success, I'm going to have to give up some of the spiritual success. So out of the 100, if you apply those two filters to it, like, I want material success, but I don't want to have to trade spiritual success. And I want material success, but I don't want to have to be any less than fully myself. That 100 gets whittled down to very few very fast. But there are still those options.
Yes, yes. And you can have both. I mean, have I mastered both? Of course not. But you can have both. And you need to make a commitment. You need to make a commitment not just to one, but to both. And that's tough. I'm not saying it isn't. It's tough. If I had committed my whole life to making money, I would be in a different situation than I'm in. But I didn't commit my whole life to making money. I committed a lot of it to fixing my pain. And by fixing my pain, I managed to find and live a lot of beauty. So it is a decision.
And can I add, you also found a way to make money and be a solvent economic unit in our society, which is to say leap, and the net, in your case, truly did appear. Yes. You didn't know when you embarked on this that there was going to be a TV show and there was going to be TED Talks and there was going to be a book or multiple books, but you leapt, and look at that. Funny how that happened, right? And that's, to me, I think that's what holds people back so much is, and by the way, I really like this. I feel like we've stumbled onto something, this idea of, let's look at my life and look at all the things I could possibly do to make money or you know, survive materially, but then filter them by, do I get to be fully myself, and do I get to be as spiritually successful as I am trying to become materially successful? And if that 100, those hypothetical 100 options, maybe they go down to zero. Maybe you literally cannot see a single path in your life where you can be fully yourself and spiritually successful while making a living. And frankly, you may have been at that point in your life where, because like you said, you didn't, or like I guess I said, you didn't know there was going to be a TV, you know, a production company and book deals on the other side of this. But it sounds like you were willing to say, okay, if I'm forced to choose between material success and spiritual success, again, if I'm forced, if that's what the universe is holding me to right now, I'll choose the spiritual. I'll play what Simon Sinek would call the infinite game, and to some degree trust the process. Did you? So I guess I'm sort of making an assumption in describing you that way. At the time you made this choice, or at whatever point you made it, let's say a one-way door choice, like you went far enough into it that you really couldn't go back to your other life. Did you think there's a career here? Or just, I don't know, I just want to feel different?
Do you know what? I think at that moment, it was, I just want to feel different. I didn't know. I didn't know that there was going to be a Netflix show. I didn't know that I was going to be speaking in a stadium. I didn't know any of this stuff. And that was the height, right? Okay, there was a long way to go to get there. But it happened. I was like, oh, all right. And that was great. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed it. That success, I loved. It was great. But I would still have done what I did, even if there was going to be no success. Mm-hmm. Like, had the Kindness Diaries show not sold to Netflix, it would have hurt me. but I still did it. I still had that experience of doing the kindness diaries, of connecting with people all around the world, of being inspired. I had that experience.
So we're nearing the end of our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience about the book, Go Be Brave? Obviously, it's out now. It's available for sale.
Yeah, I mean, people always said to me, you were really brave to do the kindness diaries. But I started to think to myself during COVID, actually, this is when I started writing the book. I was like, what is the definition of bravery? Because to me, going around the world relying on kindness wasn't necessarily brave. Bravery was each moment of truth-telling that got me to the place of doing the kindness diaries. Bravery was telling you the truth on this conversation during this podcast. So it is an experiential, adventurous journal where you get to go and have your own moments of bravery, adventures in bravery. For example, one of the adventures is called Get Mad. Get mad? We live in a society where we're told anger is bad. Don't get angry. Bad things happen when you get angry. And one of the adventures for me is like, no, get angry, but safely. Write it in your journal. Scream in the shower. Scream in the bath. Go for a run. Process your rage. Let it out. Get mad. So there are all these experiential moments that you get to actually do. It's a book of doing, which leads to being. And, it's to me, I was inspired by books. I have read many, many books. And the reason why I started writing books was because I wanted someone to take what I'd written and maybe it would change their course by 0.5%. And on year 5, it would be 12%. On year 10, it would be 19%. All because they read a book by some nutjob Englishman that circumnavigated the world on kindness. And it was like a mirror for them, which is what books were like for me. It was a mirror. They were mirrors. The Motorcycle Diaries was a mirror. All the speeches I watched on YouTube, mirrors. So I wanted to be that mirror.
So I can't help but think, I love that idea of getting safely mad, safely angry. Again, I'm sort of on this obsessive quest to operationalize and systematize mechanisms that allow people to discover and align with their created purpose on this earth, right? That's why I teach entrepreneurship, or entrepreneurialism as I call it, is because, and you're a perfect example of this, how, as you figure out your purpose, the way you can make a living with your purpose is typically to entrepreneurialize it, whatever it is, whether it's to make a TV show or publish a book or create a coaching program or start a podcast or create an online course, or, there's a myriad, start a service agency. There's so many different creative products. Like, there's so many ways to do that. But entrepreneurship is very often how you can bring your purpose and the, professional requirements of, like I said, being a solvent economic unit in the world together. That's why I'm in it. It's not because I love starting businesses per se. I love what the crucible of starting and growing a business can do for a human being. That's what I love. But and actually, I'm going to, since you were honest with me earlier, I'm going to be totally honest with you and tell you that I actually have completely forgotten the question that was supposed to be on the end of that setup. So, but actually maybe that works out, because technically we're out of time. And we'll just leave the audience wondering what my question was going to be, which maybe will be a good way for me to get you back on the show again. But please do share with the audience how they can go not only get your book, but get more of you and be abreast of what you're up to these days.
So you can get the book on Amazon and any bookstore, and you can find me on Instagram at The Kindness Guy. But what I would like to do is I want to give 10 free books away to your listeners, right? So I'll sign them, I'll send them, and you just let me know who to send them to, 10 free books of Go Be Brave.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to say, if you're listening to this, come find me on Instagram and DM me the word brave. We're supposed to ask for address, shipping information, and forward it to Leon so that he can send him a signed book.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. What a generous offer. Thank you, Leon. The kindness guy, you said, on Instagram?
At The Kindness Guy.
Okay. And go follow Leon. Since you're DMing me on Instagram, go follow Leon on Instagram. And Leon, dude, thank you, man. I'm so glad I didn't cancel, and I'm so glad you didn't cancel. This has been exactly what I needed to this morning. Appreciate it.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely gonna love this one. Check it out.
We're actually born with a possible mindset, this thing that I teach, this empowered way of thinking, this limitless belief in limitless possibilities. We're born with that. But society, unfortunately, and the growing fear and anxiety and the dinging of our phones actually trains that out of us.